Hey guys, welcome back to Magic TV. My name's Craig. It is 9 o'clock on a Friday, which means it's time for another video. And today I'm back with another documentary, another deep dive. Now, if you're not too sure what I'm talking about, the last few weeks, the last couple of months, I've been doing kind of documentaries on this channel. Every week or every couple of weeks, I've been putting documentaries up like the rise and fall of L&L Publishing. I've basically been taking points in history and examining what happened, what went right, what didn't go right, and more importantly, what we can learn as magicians from that particular situation. And I've been asking people in the comments to give me ideas as to who I should do a documentary on next, because honestly, it takes a lot of time. It is not something that you can do overnight. Each one of these takes about a week or two to put together and to get right. And a lot of people have been asking me to do a deep dive on Morgan and West, which makes sense because over here in the UK and also really all over the world, Morgan and West have been considered one of the best double acts of all time. And, you know, last year, Morgan and West just went their separate ways, and a lot of people aren't really 100% sure what happened and why, when they're at the pinnacle of their career, they suddenly went their separate ways. So today, I'm going to be doing the rise, the fall, and the legacy of the time-traveling magicians themselves, Morgan and West. So without further ado, let's get into Chapter 1. So Chapter 1, the unlikeliest of beginnings. Two academics who weren't supposed to be magicians. Now, to tell you the story about Morgan and West, really honestly, we have to go back to the beginning. We have to go back to the very start. And you know, I've interviewed so many people on my channel. And when I interview them, their origin stories are all very similar. Someone pulled a coin from behind their ear when they were knee-high to a grasshopper, or they watched Paul Daniels, and watching Paul Daniels inspired them to be a magician. But when we're talking about Morgan and West, we're not talking about going to a theatre or a magic club or some childhood dream of being a famous magician. We've got to go to Oxford. Two clever students, both knee-deep in academia, navigating university life with zero intention of becoming performers, let alone iconic time-travelling Victorian conjurers. Rhys Morgan was a physicist, a proper serious academic on a path that should have led to teaching or research. And Rob West was a chemist, analytical, thoughtful, structured, the kind of person you could just as easily have ended up writing textbooks as writing magic scripts. Neither one of them were passionate about magic. Neither one of them was passionate about performing, really. No theatre school, no long history of competition wins in magic clubs, no, a protege at the age of 9 or 10 years old, no childhood dream of performing the cups and balls on stage, just two quite intelligent blokes who crossed paths and accidentally became one of the most iconic double acts in modern history. Now, this is really important for you to understand because it frames everything that comes later. Morgan and West didn't enter magic with the mindset of magicians. They entered it with the mindset of academics, storytellers, and thinkers. That difference, that little twist there, changed the entire trajectory of their work. It all started with the accidental spark. You see, they met through Oxford's drama and entertainment scene, improv, comedy, student performance circles. Magic wasn't a thing. At least it wasn't a thing at first. But here's where the universe does its weird sliding doors moment. Rhys had been dabbling with magic recreationally. And Rob had an interest in performing and puzzles. So naturally, in that uniquely Oxford University way, they decided, hey, why don't we do a magic show as a joke? Now, the amount of people that I've spoken to that start doing magic at the age of 6 or 7 or 8 years old, here's two guys in university that aren't really that into magic that much, and they decide to do a magic show as a joke. A lot of people, they go their entire careers before they will set foot on stage going and doing a magic show, and here's Morgan and West putting it together as a joke. And to be clear, it wasn't a magic show to become magicians. It wasn't a magic show to start a career. It wasn't a magic show to storm the world. Just a fun, silly student show. Something to do. A bit of theatre, a bit of cleverness, a bit of whimsy. That show, that throwaway performance, planted the seed. And here's the irony. The joke became the career. They went from, let's try this, to, wait, this works. The early shows weren't polished. They weren't spectacular. They weren't filled with the kind of theatrical elegance that they're known for now, but they were clever. And the chemistry between Morgan and West was undeniable. They had the quintessential two-man energy without even trying. One was sharper in tone, the other was grander in presence. Both were witty, both were quick, both had timing that naturally locked into place. All the ingredients were there, they just hadn't been named yet. And that's rare. Talking from somebody who has been in double acts more than once in my career, the hardest part is making it look natural. We've all seen Morgan and West, and they're literally finishing off each other's sentences. That's rare as a double act. Most double acts will, one person will go out and perform, then another person will go out and perform, then another person will go out and perform. They had this down naturally. Like I said, they just hadn't named it yet. And that brings us to the moment, the big moment, the one that changed everything, the birth of the time-traveling Victorian magicians. You see, if you've ever wondered why Morgan and West landed so hard and so fast in the magic world, the answer is simple. They created characters that didn't exist before in magic or anywhere else. Victorian gentlemen who claimed to be time travellers, performing conjuring with a theatrical pomposity that was both charming and ridiculous. Where did it come from? Well, I'll tell you right now, it didn't come from magic books, it didn't come from mentors or magic mentors or hanging around in magic clubs, nor were they following trends. It came from literature. It came from history. It came from character study. It came from theatre. They weren't thinking, what trick should we do? Which is what most magicians think of when they're actually thinking about going on stage. They were thinking, what world can we build? And that's the difference. Most magicians build routines. Morgan and West built a universe. And that universe had rules. Victorian etiquette, a very specific type of language, overly formal character beats, exaggerated comedy, a sense of earnestness, a layer of narrative mythology, and that famous punchline, we're time-traveling magicians. It wasn't just a gimmick, it was their entire creative engine. They weren't just performing as themselves, they were performing as characters crafted with the care of novelists, because at their core, that's who they were. Writers, storytellers, thinkers, and that's why the act exploded. And here's the thing, if more magicians thought about that, thought about the characters that they are and the world in which they operate within, then their acts would be so much better. Because you see, with Morgan and West, their act clicked instantly. Audiences loved it, reviewers loved it, directors loved it, producers loved it, because it felt fresh. It didn't feel like a magic act trying to do a theme. It felt like a full theatrical show with magic woven into its DNA. And right there, before television, before touring, before fame, the core of Morgan and West were formed. They weren't magicians doing theatre. There were theatre makers doing magic. And that mindset shaped their entire career. So here's the thing, I have said on this channel over and over again, if you want to be successful as a stage magician, take acting classes, take improv classes, learn how to perform on stage, not just to do magic, but to perform, because that's what Morgan and West did. Their background was theatre in many, many ways, and that really helped make them who they were, which brings us to chapter 2. Which was basically their rise, creating a signature brand in a world of copy and paste magic. You see, the early 2010s was a weird time for magic. There was 6th Street magic, cardistry was exploding everywhere, there was minimalistic branding, dark, edgy aesthetics, illusionists were running around everywhere promoting black eyeliner. Everybody was trying to be David. Well, you know, right? Magic shops pumped out download after download after download. Performers blended into one another, black hoodies, ring lights, slow motion B-roll. And then, literally out of nowhere, 2 Victorian gentlemen stroll onto the scene like they just stepped out of a Dickens H.G. Wells crossover novel. It was genius. The magic world didn't know what it was missing until Morgan & West arrived. But let's break down exactly what they built. Number 1. The characters were fully realised, not just themed. Now, this is what most magicians never understood. Morgan & West didn't put on costumes. They didn't adopt accents, and they didn't pretend. They literally became those characters. The language, the posture, the rhythm, the emotional beats, the comedic timing, the relationship dynamic, everything, and I mean everything, was consistent. If you asked them a modern question, they'd answer in character. If something went wrong, they'd react in character. If an audience member surprised them, they had in-character solutions. Heck, later on in their career, when they started releasing magic to the magic community, they did so in character, which I've never seen before. That is why their act felt real. Most magicians add a theme. Morgan & West, like I said, constructed a universe, and they knew their characters inside out, back to front and left way, sideways, because they were those characters. Number 2, and this is also vitally important, I've spoken about this with Tom Crosby before, but it's so vitally important, their magic matched their characters. This is one of their secret weapons. The routines they chose always fit the Victorian aesthetic. Cups and balls, parlour routines, pseudo-scientific demonstrations, logic puzzles, predictions, narrative-driven set pieces, multi-phase ensemble magic, routines with theatrical beats and character conflict. They didn't just say they were Victorian, they performed Victorian. The magic didn't feel bolted on, it felt integrated. Even modern tricks were wrapped in old-world logic. What is this mysterious envelope? Observe as we employ a cunning device of mechanical sorcery. It's funny, but it's also coherent. And like I said, Tom Crosby has spoken about this before, someone else who is incredible at character work. And he talked about ever since he became the performing nerd, he hardly bought any magic because most magic tricks don't fit him. It's the same with Morgan & West. Number 3, their writing was on another level. And this is where their academic background really came through. Most magicians write patter and jokes and lines and ad-libs, myself included. But Morgan & West, they went further by far. They wrote dialogue, character art, theatrical beats, scripted banter, intentional pacing, layered comedy, emotional structure, narrative callbacks. They wrote like playwrights because in many ways they were playwrights. They were doing something so different to anything else. Number 4, I mentioned this before, but their chemistry was ridiculously strong. You can't fake 2-person chemistry. You either have it or you don't. And they had it. The rhythms, the timing, the give and take, the overlapping dialogue style, the moments of irritation and affection, the way they used conflict as comedy, the way the audiences instantly understood who was who. It was the same energy as Morecambe and Wise and Fry and Laurie and Mitchell and Webb, a double act where both voices matter. And this made their magic feel richer, funnier, and more alive than most solo performers could ever manage. Honestly, it should be required viewing for any double act to watch and study Morgan & West. Their chemistry on stage is just simply phenomenal. Number 5, they didn't chase trends, they created a niche. While everyone else in magic was trying to be modern and edgy and street, Morgan & West went in the opposite direction. They leaned into whimsy and nostalgia, character, intelligent humour, theatrical structure, Victorian charm, and the industry loved them for it. And when I talk about the industry, I'm not talking about the magic industry. I'm talking about where they would go and perform, theatres, events. They were loved. They stood out. They were different. Because when the whole market zigs, the ones who zag stand out. Number 6, they jumped from novelty act to theatre act instantly. They weren't competing with magicians. They were competing with theatre groups, family shows, comedy duos, children's theatre, touring companies, literary adaptations. And they weren't just competitive, they were better. They brought a level of craft the magic world wasn't used to. Real scripts, real staging, real character arcs, real direction, and real structure. And that's why they exploded so fast. You know, I hear magicians all the time talking about their competition. I need to stand out from this other magician. I need to stand out from this other magician. I've had conversations with magicians that have said, I need a trick that no one else is doing because that's going to make me successful. None of that will make you successful. What makes you successful is standing out and doing things completely different to any other magician. And that's what Morgan and West did so well. Number 7, television came knocking, and frankly, they smashed it. You have no idea how perfectly constructed they are for TV until you actually break it down. They have literally all the things that producers love. Visual identity, distinct characters, clear hierarchy, neat framing, fast timing, clean comedy, built-in theatre, very theatrical, audience-friendly magic. This is why they looked flawless on Penn and Teller Fool Us, The Next Great Magician, Children's BBC, countless interviews, countless variety segments. The audience loves them, and the camera loves them because the act already has cinematic grammar. Most magicians look nervous or flat on TV, especially the first or the second time they go on there and they're trying to work out how to stand out by coming up with a different magic trick. Morgan and West looked like they belonged on there because they did. And number 8, through all of this, they still didn't consider themselves magicians. And I got to tell you, I love this. I interviewed them. You can go look at it on Magic TV in the archives. I interviewed them and they said without hesitation, we don't really see ourselves as magicians. And this was during COVID. They didn't say it disrespectfully. They didn't say it dismissively. They were just honest. Because their identity wasn't built around tricks. Their identity was built around character, storytelling, theatre, writing, world-busting, comedy, timing, structure. Magic was the tool. Story was the engine. That's why they were different. That's why they stood out. That's why they became one of the most beloved double acts of the past decade. And that brings us to the heart of their story, or at least the first part of their story, their evolution into theatre giants. In the next section, we're going to cover their touring years, their creative reinvention, their shift into family theatre, and how pressures that built gradually became a bit straining. Let's go into the next chapter. Chapter 3, the evolution, becoming full-scale theatre performers. Now, when most magicians start getting tractions, they fall into one of 2 lanes. The first lane is, let's double down on magic clubs, conventions, YouTube, and magician-facing work. They become famous by really pushing themselves into the magic world. And there's nothing wrong with that. You look at Michael Amar, you look at Greg Wilson, you look at Jay Sankey. Those are people that do that. They literally go from convention to convention all over the world. That's fine. Lane B, they chase weddings, corporates, and private gigs. They will literally put themselves out there and they will consider themselves successful if they've got a full diary of weddings and corporates, and there's nothing wrong with that either. But Morgan and West chose another way. They didn't chase the magic industry. They didn't chase the event industry. They chased theatre, real theatre, touring theatre, art centres, fringe festivals, Edinburgh runs, seasonal residencies, national tours. This was the moment that separated themselves from everyone else in the magic world. They weren't magicians who did some theatre. They were theatre makers who happened to use magic. And theatre changed them in the best way possible. When you perform for theatre audiences instead of magic audiences, everything levels up. Your writing, your structure, your pacing, your emotional beats, your blocking, your moments of silence, your punchlines, your transitions, your audience connection, and more importantly, when you're on stage with the same person over and over and over and over and over again, your charisma, your chemistry, the way that you are together. Magic clubs and magic conventions, they forgive uneven pacing. Theatre audiences do not. Magic conventions enjoy clever method. Theatre audiences enjoy a compelling story. And that difference, that demand for story over trick, forced Morgan and West to evolve. And this is where they became world-class performers. You can see the shift in their work. Their early shows were more trick-based. Their middle-era shows were more character-based. And their later shows had a full narrative arc with theatrical logic. They learned to write scenes, shape emotional tension, give their characters conflict, structure 60 and 90-minute shows, develop recurring bits of business, plant and play off jokes, and control pacing hour by hour, not trick by trick. They became, intentionally or not, one of the most successful theatrical magic acts in Britain. And then came the Fringe years, which is literally where they forged themselves. Now, I've never done an Edinburgh Fringe. I have friends that have, but I've done other Fringe festivals. And one of the big things that happened in my career that really gave me a big break was doing the Brighton Fringe. So I can talk about Fringe festivals, and I've spoken to people. And I know for a fact that if you've ever done an Edinburgh Fringe, you know it's a crucible. It breaks the weak and it sharpens the strong. For Morgan and West, the Fringe was their creative forge. It forced them to refine scripts, cut dead weight, adapt routines quickly, rehearse relentlessly, deliver consistent quality, perform under pressure, and experiment constantly. Every Fringe run made them better, every new show made them braver, and this is where they started to stand out as something more than two Victorians doing magic tricks. They became storytellers. They were building running gags, recurring themes, embedding character flaws, charming audience dynamics, narrative callbacks, long-form routines with an emotional punch. This was the birth of what would later be their greatest strength and their greatest burden. You see, their ambition grew faster than their resources. Remember, it's not like they had a massive team behind them. You know, you see a lot of double acts that have a massive team behind them. They were doing everything themselves. And by everything, I mean everything. Writing, directing, producing, marketing, performing, booking, touring, admin, prop building, costume management. Every new show wasn't just a creative challenge. It was a logistical nightmare. Because for them, a show was more than just taking a couple of props out and pushing them on stage. It was creating a new world with props and backdrops and everything. But here's what makes Morgan and West special. They didn't take shortcuts. They didn't settle for good enough. They kept scaling the ambition of each show, even when the workload became ridiculous. And this is where seeds of burnt out were planted. Probably not visible, probably not even aware of it themselves, but real. Their ambition kept rising, the infrastructure stayed the same, and the cracks began forming quietly, respectfully, and privately. But we'll get to that later. First of all, somewhere in this period, the media took notice. Their brand was too strong, too visual, too theatrical for TV to ignore. Producers looked at them and thought, these guys look like they were built for television. And they were, like I said before. The characters, the banter, the staging, the structure, the clarity, their charm. This is where the magic world really started to pay attention as well, when they went on Penn and Teller Fool Us. One of the best double act performances the show has ever featured. Not because the method, not because they fooled Penn and Teller, but because they delivered a performance with clear character, clear framing, well-timed comedy, theatrical energy, proper audience control. They looked like seasoned pros because they were seasoned pros. This single TV appearance did more for their profile than any magic club could have in 10 years. And it wasn't luck. It was the result of years of refining their craft under theatre conditions. They took their shot and they went with it, and it catapulted them to the next level. So in chapter 4, we'll look at the family show era, their most successful and their most demanding period. Now we get to the turning point. That era that made Morgan and West unbelievably successful, but also unbelievably stressed. Family theatre. Now, let me be clear. Family theatre is not kids' shows. It's not balloon modelling and birthday parties. Family theatre is proper stage work, multi-generational audiences, narrative-driven shows, intelligent humour, theatrical production values, tight scripting, strict pacing, high expectations, lots of tech, lots of props. This wasn't a side hustle for Morgan and West. This was one of their biggest and their most successful periods. And it came with huge rewards and huge pressures. So, first of all, let's examine about why family theatre fit them perfectly. Morgan and West were uniquely built for family theatre. Their characters were whimsical, old-fashioned, funny, charming, larger than life, and instantly recognisable. Adults got the wit. Kids loved the costumes. Grandparents appreciated the nostalgia. It was a rare genre where everybody got something out of the show. And that's difficult to do. I've done family shows for years, not at the level of Morgan and West did, but when you've got a multi-generational audience, it's very difficult to have everybody get something out of the show. And their shows were clever, not childish, not patronising, not simplistic. They respected the kids' intelligence, they respected the adults' intelligence, and they wrote shows the whole audience could enjoy together. That's rare, that's special, and that's why they sold so many tickets. And that's what they did. They were selling out over and over and over again. But you know, they did that without even doing something like Britain's Got Talent or anything like that. They did it just by being damn good. But family theatre is exhausting. Here's what most magicians that don't do this don't know. Family shows typically run morning performances, matinees, double show days, school holiday bursts, touring blocks, long residences, early call times, tight turnarounds. And Morgan and West didn't simply do family shows, they did elaborate ones. That meant more props, more stage work, more setup, more teardown, more travel, more admin, more energy expenditure. And remember, it was still just the two of them. No backstage crew, no tour manager, no set team, no assistant, no booking office, just them. It's no wonder the pressure started quietly building, to be perfectly honest. The shows got bigger, the expectations got bigger, and the strain got bigger. So as their reputations grew, so did the audience expectations. People would go back and see them every single time, over and over again. They would be constantly writing new shows for different audiences, historical shows, science shows, everything. But every new show had to be bigger, funnier, sharper, cleverer, more theatrical, more magical, more narrative driven. But there were still only two of them, remember? They didn't bring anyone else in. Yeah, there worked sometimes with people like Peter Clifford, but generally as a rule, they did all the writing, they did all the producing, they did all of the administration, they did all the travel, all the rehearsing, all the performing for years. This is the part of the story where the outside world saw nothing but success, while inside the workload was getting heavier and heavier. But, and this is important, there was no conflict, no resentment, no fracture. Just growing weight, growing responsibility, growing execution, growing pressure. It didn't stop them. They kept creating, they kept performing, they kept delivering high quality shows, but the cost was rising silently, politely, and steadily. Which brings us to chapter 5. The reinvention years, science shows, new markets, expanding the brand. You see, by this stage, Morgan & West were already one of the most recognisable double acts in British magic. They could have easily coasted. Most performers hit a winning formula and think, job done, let's just repeat this for the next 10 years. Come on, you've all seen people go on the lecture tour over and over again, just playing the same hits over and over again. But not Morgan & West. They reinvented themselves again. They pushed into an entirely new genre, science theatre, and not in a token way, not in a let's add a smoke machine and call it science way. That's not what Morgan and West do. That's not what they've ever done. They built full educational shows from the ground up. They researched it properly. They wrote properly, structured properly, tested properly, presented with real clarity, humour, and theatrical storytelling. This wasn't two magicians doing tricks with a vaguely sciencey description. This was legitimate science communication through theatrical characters. And here's why this reinvention mattered. This expanded their reach dramatically. Suddenly, their audiences weren't just families, magic fans, and theatre goers. They now included schools, science festivals, STEM organisations, science centres, educational touring networks, programme managers for children's education. And that meant new income streams, new venues, new tours, new programming cycles, new audiences, new expectations. It was a brilliant strategic move from a business point of view. From a growth point of view, it was a fantastic move. It kept them relevant. It kept them fresh. It kept them creatively excited. But it also added new layers of work and responsibility. And again, to be clear, it was still just them. No admin team, no production office, no logistics manager, 2 humans running a company that was now operating like a small touring theatre company. It's not like they had management doing all of this for them. By this point, a lot of acts have management. No, they did it all themselves. And that's when they started to experience the pressure of diversification. You see, the reinvention worked, but here's the catch. Every new show, every new genre, every new tour added more plates to spin. More bookings, more emails, more negotiations, more tech riders, more planning, more writing, more travel arrangements, more props to maintain, more costumes to build, more touring package variations. This isn't me speculating. This is straight from their own interviews. I've gone back putting this together, and I've listened to so many interviews, not just the one I did, multiple interviews that Morgan & West have done throughout their entire career. And many, many times, the key thing that you see again and again is they talk about juggling so many projects, they sometimes lose track of which show they were performing that week. They're spinning plates, and when you start spinning a lot of plates, it's very, very difficult to keep all of those plates spinning. Their creative identity fractured into multiple lanes: Victorian magicians, time-travelling characters, family magicians, children's theatre presenters, science communicators, stage illusionists, festival performers, close-up magicians, rarely, but occasionally. It kept the brand alive, but it also stretched the brand thin. This is the part of the story where cracks began. Not emotional cracks, not partnership cracks, but capacity cracks. The cracks really only widen from here. But you need to understand something. When you're building a business, it is possible for that business to build too quickly, too fast. And the business infrastructure can't cope with the level of growth and the level of work. And I think that's what's actually happened here. Which brings us to chapter 6. The unseen burden, business admin, and the weight of pretty much doing everything. This is the chapter most magicians will really feel. It's the part no one talks about publicly, but every performer understands it privately. And if you're a performer, if you are a full-time performer, I want to ask yourself a question. Can you relate to what I'm about to say? You see, there was so much going on. The admin, the bookings, the financial planning, the touring logistics, the rehearsal scheduling, the client follow-up, the invoicing, the insurance, the accounting, the promotional materials, the social media, the posters, the venue negotiations, all of it. Morgan & West didn't just perform. They ran a functioning touring company. And touring companies normally have a producer, a general manager, a booking agent, a technical manager, a tour manager, a marketing team, a graphic designer, a publicist, an accountant. Or they've got some sort of management company that's doing all of that for them. But Morgan & West were doing all of those jobs. 2 people doing a workload of 10. And the magic world didn't necessarily see that. You see, within the magic world, we saw the shows. We saw the posters. We saw the TV spots. We saw the smiling photos. We saw the social media posts. We saw the sellout runs. And you know what? It's always the grass is greener, isn't it? I've done it before. When I watch an act and I'm like, oh, they're so much more successful than me. Look at how well they're doing. I wish I could be where they were. And here's the thing. What we don't see is we didn't see them in a travel lodge at midnight writing copy for a venue brochure due tomorrow. We didn't see them doing last-minute prop repairs. We didn't see them emailing schools to finalise tech needs. We didn't see them answering audience messages. We didn't see them structuring tours on a spreadsheet. We didn't see them trying to fit rehearsals around 2 personal lives, 2 households, and 2 sets of responsibilities. Their success was brilliant, but it wasn't free. It was a little bit like having a marriage, a creative marriage, and the marriage started to show strains. And this is important. They were not just business partners, they were not just performers, and they were not just collaborators. They were, by their own words in interviews, in a creative marriage. Now, creative marriages are amazing when they work, but they require constant effort, compromise, communication, and emotional bandwidth. I've had business partners that I've worked with, performed with, created with, built businesses with, and it is difficult. And then when you add touring fatigue, financial pressure, audience expectations, production responsibilities, the stress of constantly reinventing your show, the exhaustion of long tech days, the burnout from admin overload, it becomes a lot. I remember touring holiday parks when Ryland was born, not really seeing him for the whole year, and not knowing if I was going to have a marriage if I didn't cut back. And here's the thing with Morgan and West, unlike a real marriage where you live in the same home and you share the same rhythms, Morgan and West had two separate lives, two separate families, separate obligations. The partnership was strong, the friendship was strong, the mutual respect was strong, but the workload, that was becoming unsustainable. And that brings us to the next chapter, the moment that everything changed. You see, in chapter 7, we're going to talk about the pandemic. The moment everything stopped. Every act, every magician has a COVID survival story, and every act's COVID survival story is different. Some magicians crumbled. They left magic. They've disappeared. They've gone and done something else. They haven't picked up a pack of cards in almost 5 years. Some pivoted and did something else. Some discovered new income streams. Some realized they hated performing after all. But for Morgan and West, the pandemic wasn't just a pause, it was a mirror. A moment where the entire machinery of touring theatre slammed to a halt. And in that silence, they had to confront questions that they'd never had time to ask in the past. What do we really want? What kind of work-life balance have we been living? Do we want to continue carrying a touring schedule like this? Do we want to keep reinventing year after year? Is this the level of exhaustion sustainable? Are we performing because we love it or because we're too afraid to stop? For years, they'd been sprinting, and now they were forced to stop. And stopping changed everything. You see, they're two performers, two humans, two different lives. And this is where the differences between Reese and Morgan, in particular lifestyle responsibilities and internal motivations, became clearer. Not bad differences, not conflict differences, just differences. One had a growing family, one had different career ambitions, one found joy in certain type of shows, while the other found joy in a different type of shows. One felt pulled towards the stability of home, and one felt pulled towards the creative avenues. The pandemic highlighted all of this, and here's the key. They didn't drift apart because of resentment. They drifted apart because of clarity. Stopping made them see their lives differently. Stopping made them see their future differently. Stopping made them realize that what made sense in 2015 didn't necessarily make sense in 2022. This wasn't a dramatic collapse. It was a quiet divergence, a respectful one, a thoughtful one, a mutually understood one. But once a creative partnership evolves in different directions, it's nearly impossible to resynchronize it. Which brings us to chapter 8, the decision to end. A grown-up, intelligent, mutual choice. Now, here's the truth. The magic world rarely hears because it rarely happens. Morgan and West did not break up. They completed a partnership. They didn't implode. They didn't fall out. They didn't resent each other. They didn't blame each other. They looked at their lives, their families, their future, and they made an adult decision. It's time. And when they did announce it, it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't emotionally manipulative. It wasn't a plea for attention. It was thoughtful. It was honest. It was mature. It was responsible. They ended the partnership with dignity, respect, gratitude, pride, and transparency. How rare is that in our industry? I'll tell you. Very. No scandals, no arguments, no bitterness, no finger pointing. Just two incredibly talented performers acknowledging that the next chapters of their lives needed different shapes. A creative marriage that ended on good terms rather than being dragged out past its natural cycle. Which brings us to chapter 9. After the announcement. and the magic community reacts. You see, Morgan and West announced they were ending the double act. The reaction in the magic world was, well, odd, to be perfectly honest. The general public, their theatre audience, responded with warmth, nostalgia, a bit of sadness, and mainly respect. But magicians, on the other hand, responded with something way more revealing. Wait, why? You're at your peak. And that, right there, shows how disconnected the public-facing success was from internal reality. Magicians, the magic community, they judge success by fame, gigs, touring schedules, social media visibility, the number of tricks you release, the number of convention appearances you do, how often your name pops up in conversation. The amount of times I speak to a magician, they go, oh, if I could tour, I would be so successful. If I could create a magic trick. But Morgan and West were never magician famous. They were theatre famous. And that's a completely different world. They weren't posting every day. They weren't chasing likes. They weren't grinding convention circuits. They weren't trying to be influencers. They were building shows that sold out. And magicians fundamentally don't understand the emotional, physical, and creative toll that kind of work demands. So when Morgan and West said, we're done, the magic world took it kind of personally. They shouldn't have. Their decision had nothing to do with us, the community. It had everything to do with the reality of two human beings with families, responsibilities, different ambitions, different personal rhythms, different desires for the next decade of their lives. And for the first time, in a rather long time, they listened to their lives rather than their workload. Which brings us to chapter 10, where Richard Young brought Morgan and West onto the Magicians podcast and interviewed them, and they laid the truth bare. Richard Young's interview with Morgan and West after they announced their split is one of the most honest discussions ever recorded about the reality of a creative partnership. And you really have to listen to it. There's no drama. There's no bitterness. There's no subtext. There's no coded messages. Just clarity. And here is what they said, plainly and respectfully. They still like each other. They still respected each other deeply. They still valued the act, and they still believed in the work. They just didn't want to continue touring at that pace anymore, and they both admitted something incredibly rare. The act is bigger than either of us individually. That's not ego, that's honestly. They also talked openly about the cost of constant travel, constant rehearsal, constant admin, constant pressure, constant sacrifice, constant juggling of family life, constant reinvention, constant expectations, constant strain on health and energy and mental balance. And the key sentence, the one that explains everything, came from a moment where they said, essentially, we built something beautiful. But to keep it going would require giving up other parts of our lives that we're not willing to sacrifice anymore. And that's it. That's the truth. Not a scandal, not conflict, not drama. Just two people choosing a healthier and more sustainable future. Which brings us to chapter 11. What happened next? Rhys and Morgan go their own ways. Rhys and Morgan and West go their own ways. A partnership ending doesn't mean people disappearing, and in Morgan and West's case, it was actually refreshing to see what came next. So Rhys leaned into solo performances, solo writing, creative consulting, education work, science communication, more home stability, personal projects he couldn't pursue during the partnership. He eased into a rhythm that wasn't dictated by touring blocks and constant reinvention. He rediscovered personal equilibrium. And I know this because the first thing that Rhys did after Morgan and West went their separate ways was take on the role as stage manager for Cillian O'Connor's My World of Magic tour that Ryland was actually a part of. And myself and Matt Cluley got a chance to spend basically the entire run with Rhys Morgan. And I sat down and spoke to him many times, and he told me he'd never felt happier. His wife was there with him many, many times, and he was in such a great place. Robert West, West lent into teaching, academia, writing, developing new solo work on his own terms, and exploring creative ideas that didn't require two-person stage dynamics. And he's been very open about wanting a more balanced life. The important part is neither one of them tried to replicate Morgan and West. They respected the act too much to dilute it. They understood Morgan and West only works when it's Morgan and West. And that kind of integrity is rare. You know, the magic community sometimes is a little bit like the wrestling industry. When somebody says they're retiring, they typically don't retire. They'll come back and do the same thing again and again, whether they are physically fit enough to do it or not. Well, that's not what happened with Morgan and West. Which brings us to chapter 12, the magic of ending at the right time. Here's the thing magicians struggle with. Most performers stay too long. They cling to relevance. They cling to bookings. They cling to existing material. They cling to the safety of what they've always done. They cling to a brand that stopped serving them years ago. Morgan and West did the opposite. They ended before the decline, before the fatigue made them sloppy, before burnout made them bitter, before resentment could creep in, before the act became a burden rather than a joy. They ended on a high, and that is unbelievably rare and unbelievably smart. Here's the thing. In one of my interviews with them, they said something that shocked a lot of magicians. Like I said at the beginning, they said, we don't consider ourselves magicians. To magicians, that sounds like hearsay. To theatre people, that made perfect sense. Because Morgan and West weren't trying to be great magicians. They were trying to be great characters, great storytellers, great writers, and great theatre makers. Magic happened to be the medium that they used most of the time. And this is why they stood out. Most magicians think the trick is the meal. For Morgan and West, the trick was the seasoning. The real meal is the character, the structure, the story, the rhythm, the pacing, the theatrical logic, the relationship dynamics, the comedic beats, the narrative arcs. They were magicians in the same way Derren Brown is a magician or Penn and Teller are magicians, which is to say they're theatre artists first and magic is the language they speak. This distinction matters for one reason. It explains everything they've accomplished and it explains why they stopped. Here's the truth most magicians never experience. It's easy to release a trick. It is. It's not the most difficult thing in the world. If you sat down and you thought about it, I reckon within a couple of months, somebody could create and release a trick. It's also easy to do weddings and corporates. Marketing's not difficult. Getting the gigs isn't difficult. And honestly, just having 5 tricks in your arsenal, you can go and kill at a wedding or a corporate. It's also easy to make a TikTok account and go viral. If you shoot enough content, it's going to happen. You throw enough against the wall, occasionally something's going to stick. It's also easy to tour occasionally, every so often. But it's not easy to create a full-length show every year. It's not easy to write scripts, block scenes, rehearse multi-routine arcs, handle lighting and sound cues, maintain props, tour theatres, perform for thousands, deal with multi-show days, travel consistency, carry admin and accounting and marketing and production, grow an audience organically for a decade. That level of ambition is normally carried by theatre companies, funded organisations and multi-person production teams, and Morgan and West did it with 2 people for a decade. That is extraordinary. But extraordinary workloads eventually require extraordinary sacrifices. And after years and years and years, they chose not to keep sacrificing. Which brings us to the final chapter. What can the magic community learn from Morgan and West? This is where we step back and extract the real lessons, the one that matters to working magicians, creators, producers, and performers. What can we learn from Morgan and West? Number 1, your brand must be clear, bold, and instantly recognizable. The Victorian look wasn't an aesthetic, it was a strategy. In a world drowning in sameness, they stood out instantly. The lesson is, if your poster looks like everyone else's, you're already behind. I have lost count of the amount of times I've seen wedding magicians look identical to each other. The best magicians, the ones that are the most successful, are the ones that really stand out and learn to reinvent themselves. Look at David Penn, he's the perfect example. Lesson number 2, theatre audiences are worth more than magic audiences. They pay more, they appreciate more, they come back more, they give better reviews, and they build careers, not gigs. It's also less competition, especially if you can stand out like Morgan and West did. Honestly, the real lesson here is if you really want to be successful, you need to look at theatrical audiences. Number 3, You can't run a two-person theatre company forever. It's unsustainable. Admin kills creativity. Logistics kill passion. Workload kills balance. Even the strongest partnerships have limits. The one thing that I think I've always done quite well is surround myself with people that can do the things that I can't, won't, or bad at doing better than me. I have a team behind me so that I can do more without burnout. People say to me all the time, Craig, how do you do so much? How is it possible for you to do so much? It's very simple. I do so much because I constantly surround myself with the best. You cannot keep doing it on your own forever if you want to continue to grow and have strategic long-term growth. Number 4, reinvention is the key to longevity. Science shows, family shows, Edinburgh runs, narrative shows, creating magic for the community, TV appearances, they never stayed still. Stagnation kills acts and reinvention extends careers. Again, look at David Penn. He's reinvented himself so many times. Whilst you look at other magicians, I'm not going to name names, I think you know who I'm talking about, they do the same things over and over again and expect different results. You have to reinvent yourselves. Number 5, ending at the right time is a superpower. Most magicians fade. Morgan & West didn't fade, they finished. There's a world of difference. I have been very open about the fact that the reason I do so much away from performing is because one day I'm going to step back. I'm going to stop completely. I don't want to be that old guy that's still going out on stage because I don't have an option. Make sure you set yourself up to be able to end at the right time. Number 6, partnerships are fragile even when everything is going well. Pressure doesn't always break partnerships. Sometimes clarity does, and that's okay. But here's the thing. I have been in partnerships in my life, and they have all ended very, very badly. The only partnership that's ever worked from a business point of view is the partnership I've had with my wife. Partnerships, when you get into a thing where you're doing something with somebody else, it can be very, very difficult. Number 7, you can love something deeply and choose to still stop. And this is the hardest lesson of all. Passion does not erase exhaustion. Creativity does not erase logic or logistics, and success does not erase sacrifice. Stopping is not failure. Stopping is wisdom. Sometimes ending is okay. And that's the biggest lesson that I learned from Morgan & West. So the question is, what have they left behind? What is their legacy? When future historians look at the British magic between 2010 and 2023, I guarantee you Morgan & West will be one of the defining acts of the eras. Not because of their tricks, not because of their methods, not because of their magician fame, but because they built a world-class brand. They created high-quality theatre. They respected their audience. They respected their craft. They respected each other. They left before they declined. They demonstrated creative integrity. They influenced hundreds of performers. They proved magic could be real theatre. They showed that character-driven magic works, and perhaps their greatest legacy is this.